The night was quiet at the gas station, a dull hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The pumps glistened under a thin drizzle, and the wind carried the faint scent of gasoline and wet asphalt. To any passerby, it was just another ordinary night, nothing unusual, nothing worth noticing. But inside the patrol car, Officer Greg Hutchins tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, scanning the lot with the practiced vigilance of someone used to expecting trouble. He had been driving this beat for years, and late-night gas stations were routine stops. Rarely did anything happen here beyond a missed payment, a spilled drink, or a minor argument over air for tires. Tonight, Hutchins noticed a lone figure near pump number 3, a man, elderly, stooped slightly, wearing a weathered coat that looked like it had survived decades. His hands moved with care, gripping the pump nozzle, filling the tank with the methodical precision of someone who had done this countless times. The man didn't look suspicious, at least not in the way Hutchins expected. But something in the way he moved, a subtle hesitation, a glance over his shoulder, tripped Hutchins' instincts. Maybe it was the way shadows played across the man's face under the flickering light. Maybe it was the quiet solitude of a night that should have been empty. Hutchins didn't know, but the gut feeling was enough. He stepped out of the car, boots crunching against wet gravel. "Evening, sir," he called, voice neutral but firm. The man straightened, nodded, and continued pumping gas. Hutchins walked closer, hand resting lightly on his belt, training himself to read every motion, every twitch, every sign of nervousness. As he approached, he noticed the man's hands weren't trembling, the eyes weren't darting in panic. There was a calmness there, a quiet composure that felt almost out of place. Hutchins' mind catalogued it all: the posture, the measured movements, the lack of hesitation when replacing the nozzle. He noted the lack of identification visible, the quietness, and the fact that no one else was around. And then, without warning, he made the call that would change everything. "I'm going to need you to step aside, sir. You're being detained." The elderly man froze, then slowly straightened, his hands leaving the pump. There was no fear in his eyes, no sign of surprise. Just a measured calm, almost like someone who had seen this moment coming long before it arrived. Hutchins' heart beat a little faster. He had done this before, countless times. Arrests were routine, but something about this one felt different. "Do you know why?" Hutchins asked, keeping his voice controlled, professional. The man tilted his head slightly, a small, almost imperceptible smirk crossing his face. "I suppose you do," he said softly. The voice was steady, quiet, but carried weight. Hutchins felt a flicker of unease. It wasn't disrespect, it wasn't mockery. It was certainty, knowledge that this interaction wasn't going to follow the usual pattern. Hutchins stepped closer, hand on his belt, eyes scanning the lot as if seeking unseen witnesses. He had done this enough to know the next steps by rote: identification, verbal warnings, handcuffs if necessary. The elderly man, however, seemed already several moves ahead. Each motion, each pause, each glance was measured. Hutchins felt an unfamiliar tension creep up his spine. The quiet of the night seemed to expand, stretching the seconds between words. Cars passed by on the highway, their headlights cutting through the darkness, but no one stopped. The gas station was empty, isolated, and in that isolation, the moment felt heavier than it should have. Hutchins cleared his throat and repeated, "Sir, please step aside. This is for your safety and mine." There was no rush, no attempt to evade, just a calm, deliberate compliance, as though the man understood the process but also understood how easily it could be disrupted. Hutchins' eyes flicked to the rear-view mirror, noting the reflection of the man's steady posture. He had expected fear, hesitation, resistance, but there was none. Only control. The old man stepped back, slowly, methodically, but Hutchins noticed something subtle. The movement was purposeful, precise, as if every shift of weight had been calculated. Hutchins, trained to detect nervousness, felt a rising doubt. He was supposed to feel in command, yet the air of control emanating from this man unsettled him. He reached for his notebook to request identification. The man handed over a wallet, and Hutchins flipped it open. There it was, the standard credentials of any citizen. Hutchins' eyes scanned quickly. Nothing unusual, nothing extraordinary. Yet, there was a lingering impression that the man's presence carried weight beyond what was visible on paper. Hutchins swallowed. He had been trained to follow protocol, and protocol demanded the next step. "I'm going to have to place you under arrest," he said. The man's gaze met his, calm, unwavering, almost challenging. Hutchins felt a flicker of doubt again. Something about this was off, but it was too late to turn back. The handcuffs clicked open, and Hutchins guided the man toward the patrol car. But with every step, the man's composure never wavered. Hutchins noticed the slight tightening of his own chest, the tightening of his grip, and the subtle shift in awareness. He had made the arrest, but it already felt like the arrest had been a mistake, a choice he hadn't fully understood at the time. As they reached the car, Hutchins glanced at the man again. There was history there, unspoken, invisible, yet palpable. The quiet intelligence radiating from the man was disarming, almost intimidating. Hutchins tried to mask it with authority, but every instinct screamed that this would not proceed like a normal arrest. The elderly man stepped into the patrol car without resistance. No complaints, no arguments, no hesitation. Hutchins closed the door, heart thudding, feeling the tension in the confined space. Something was about to happen, something he had never anticipated. And deep down, he knew he had chosen the wrong person to arrest, not because of identity, but because of experience, composure, and the quiet certainty that radiated from the man sitting beside him. And then, as Hutchins started the engine, a subtle but unmistakable signal of challenge flickered in the man's eyes. Not anger, not fear, not submission, but understanding, awareness, and preparation. A warning without words, a quiet assertion that the night was far from over. Hutchins gripped the steering wheel tighter. The routine, the mundane, the familiar, all of it had been replaced by a creeping uncertainty. The camera mounted on the dashboard captured the scene, though it would not capture the weight of the moment. The elderly man leaned back slightly, relaxed, almost casual, yet every motion carried calculation. Hutchins shifted in his seat, aware that every move he made was being assessed, measured, and, perhaps, anticipated. By the time the first miles passed in silence, Hutchins felt it. This was not a normal arrest. Nothing about this interaction would be ordinary. And as the patrol car moved into the dark streets, the audience, had they been watching, would have been left with one unnerving truth. The cop had picked the wrong man. The patrol car hummed quietly through the streets, the rain softly tapping against the windows, masking the tension inside. Officer Hutchins kept his hands on the wheel, eyes forward, but the unease that had been creeping up since the gas station only grew stronger. He had made countless arrests before, but something about this man, the quiet composure, the unshakable calm, was different. Hutchins felt like a chess player moving blindly against an opponent already several moves ahead. The elderly man remained silent, hands folded neatly on his lap. Not a twitch, not a glance aside, only measured stillness. Hutchins tried to fill the silence with small talk, the standard lines meant to assert authority and gauge compliance. "You understand why this is happening, right?" he asked. The man simply nodded, eyes forward, expression neutral. Hutchins felt an unexpected friction in his chest. This man wasn't resisting in the conventional sense, yet every instinct Hutchins had trained for screamed that something was off. The calm wasn't submission, it was control. Every word, every breath, every subtle shift of the eyes suggested awareness, strategy, and patience that Hutchins could not anticipate. The station, the patrol car, even the roads around them seemed to shrink under the weight of the silence. Hutchins reviewed the arrest in his mind. Routine checks, protocol steps, verbal commands, all had been executed. Yet, the elderly man had deflected none of it, challenged none of it, and resisted nothing in a traditional sense. He had already rewritten the rules of engagement simply by remaining composed. Hutchins' radio crackled, breaking the momentary silence. Another officer reported a routine call from nearby, unaware of the tension in Hutchins' car. Hutchins responded, nodding without turning his head, but his eyes were fixed on the passenger. The elderly man tilted his head slightly, just enough to meet Hutchins' gaze. No words, no gestures, only a look that conveyed understanding, awareness, and perhaps even subtle amusement at the tension he had inspired. As the car approached the station, Hutchins tried to plan the next steps. Standard procedures, forms, body searches, but every action was now tainted by doubt. The man's demeanor suggested that nothing could be approached normally. Hutchins realized that even the act of handcuffing, once routine, now felt like a miscalculation. The elderly man's subtle posturing, his quiet observance, had already rewritten the dynamics of authority in the confined space. At the station, Hutchins guided the man through the standard processing routine. Cameras followed every step, officers observed from nearby desks, and forms were signed and stamped. Yet, with every motion, Hutchins felt a growing dissonance. He was no longer simply arresting someone. He was navigating a situation orchestrated to challenge him, to force him into overthinking, to exploit his procedural assumptions. The elderly man answered questions with precision, never too much, never too little. Every response was carefully measured, revealing nothing unnecessary yet subtly exposing gaps in the arresting officer's logic. Hutchins noted each answer in his notebook, feeling the creeping frustration of being constantly assessed. He had expected compliance or confusion, not calculation. Witnesses began to trickle in, staff from the gas station, nearby residents, and even a delivery driver who had stopped to check on the unusual activity. Each perspective added a new layer of complication. Minor contradictions in their statements, subtle inconsistencies, and overlooked details collectively began to paint a picture of the elderly man as more than just a passive subject. He had lived, observed, and understood far more than Hutchins had accounted for. The interrogation room became the stage for a quiet standoff. Hutchins sat across from the man, trying to maintain the upper hand. But for every question posed, the man's calm clarity exposed assumptions, procedural oversights, and weak points in the officer's approach. Hutchins realized, almost too late, that this was no ordinary suspect. Every reaction, every hesitation, or lack thereof, was strategic. Outside the room, other officers whispered among themselves, exchanging uneasy glances. It was unusual for an arrest to provoke this level of tension. The elderly man's presence had disrupted the expected flow of events, forcing a reconsideration of both procedure and authority. Even the body cam footage, which usually captured only facts, seemed to capture the imbalance of power, the subtle assertion of control by someone no one had expected to command it. As the hours passed, the narrative began to shift. Hutchins reviewed the events repeatedly, each pass revealing new layers. Small details, the way the man adjusted his coat, the way he folded his hands, the almost imperceptible nods, revealed a lifetime of experience. He had been underestimated, judged by appearance rather than capability. Hutchins felt the weight of his miscalculation. The tension escalated further when the station's internal systems flagged anomalies related to the arrest. Digital logs showed movements, timestamps, and communications that didn't align with the expected timeline. Hutchins' initial instincts were correct. Something had been overlooked, underestimated, or misunderstood. The elderly man was not just present, he was a catalyst for disruption, forcing the investigation and the officer into unfamiliar territory. The pivotal moment came when Hutchins reviewed the body cam footage alone in a dimly lit office. Frame by frame, he noticed subtleties he had missed in real time. The man's calm wasn't passive, it was deliberate. His gestures, glances, and timing were precise, revealing a mind accustomed to observation, calculation, and strategy. Hutchins felt a chill as he realized how completely he had misjudged the situation. This revelation rippled through the station. Officers debated quietly, some questioning the procedural decisions that had led to the arrest, others acknowledging the remarkable composure of the elderly man. Witnesses, footage, and logs all converged to tell a story subtly different from what Hutchins had assumed at the outset. He had picked the wrong person, someone whose experience, calm, and intellect completely overturned the expected dynamics of a routine arrest. At this point, it was clear that this was no ordinary arrest. The elderly man had turned every assumption on its head, quietly revealing gaps in authority, procedure, and perception. Hutchins, the officer who had thought himself in control, now understood the depth of the miscalculation. The final, unsettling note came from a quiet observation. Every movement, every gesture, and every calm response of the man seemed calculated not just for the present moment, but for consequences that would unfold later, consequences Hutchins could not yet predict. The stage was set for the revelations to come, and the audience was left asking, who truly held? The days after the arrest were a whirlwind of investigation, internal reviews, and quiet disbelief. Officer Hutchins replayed every moment over and over, each pass through the body cam footage revealing subtleties he hadn't noticed in real time. The elderly man, The quiet, calm figure at the gas station was no ordinary citizen. Every motion, every measured pause, every glance had been a demonstration of decades of discipline, awareness, and experience that Hutchins had entirely underestimated. It wasn't until Hutchins reviewed official records and spoke to witnesses again that the truth became clear. The man he had arrested was Rear Admiral James Wellington Carter, a decorated 40-year veteran of the Navy, who had commanded fleets, navigated crises, and survived situations far more dangerous than a late-night gas station encounter. His calm demeanor, his strategic composure, his subtle defiance of expectation, all of it made perfect sense. Hutchins had unknowingly provoked someone who had spent a lifetime anticipating pressure, calculating risk, and responding with precision. The revelation rippled through the department. Internal Affairs opened a review of the officer's conduct, scrutinizing the arrest for procedural violations, racial profiling, and judgment errors. The gas station staff and eyewitnesses were interviewed again. Every statement, every detail, began to reinforce the growing narrative. Hutchins had misjudged the situation completely. The elderly man's age, appearance, and quiet demeanor had masked a lifetime of experience and authority that made him more than capable of responding to injustice intelligently. When the investigation reached Rear Admiral Carter himself, he offered a calm but unmistakable recounting of events. He had been cooperative at the time, but nothing about his compliance had been passive. Each decision he made, each gesture, had been calculated to de-escalate tension while quietly exposing the officer's errors. The Admiral had noted Hutchins' assumptions from the start, understanding how procedural confidence could be manipulated and how authority could be subtly challenged without resistance. The consequences for Hutchins were immediate. He faced disciplinary hearings for improper arrest procedures, racial profiling, and failure to follow protocol. His credibility within the department was shaken, and he was temporarily suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. But the larger impact went far beyond one officer. The department as a whole underwent internal reforms, bias training, stricter oversight of arrests, and new review systems designed to prevent future errors of judgment. Yet, for the Admiral, the outcome was more than institutional reform, it was a strategic victory. He had turned a moment of personal injustice into a demonstration of accountability, highlighting systemic issues and forcing the department to confront procedural flaws. The incident, initially humiliating and frustrating, became a platform for lasting change. Through composure, awareness, and intelligence, he had transformed a routine arrest into a lesson on oversight, authority, and respect. The psychological impact on Hutchins was profound. He had approached the arrest with confidence, following standard procedures, assuming control. But he had underestimated a subtle, quiet force. He realized, painfully, that appearances could be deceiving, that authority alone did not guarantee success, and that patience and experience could overturn assumptions in an instant. The memory of the calm eyes, the measured movements, and the subtle aura of command haunted him long after the official proceedings concluded. Witnesses and colleagues reflected on what had occurred. Some marveled at the Admiral's composure, noting that few could have handled such a tense, unexpected situation with such precision. Others debated the implications for law enforcement, questioning how often similar misjudgments might occur, unseen and unreported. Each retelling of the story reinforced a central truth: authority can be challenged in subtle ways, and assumptions can be dangerous. Even with reforms and accountability measures in place, the story left a lingering unease. The arrest, while ultimately resolved through procedure and reflection, had exposed vulnerabilities in the system. It had shown how a momentary lapse in judgment could escalate into scrutiny, public attention, and institutional reform. And it had revealed how one individual, equipped with knowledge, patience, and composure, could shift the balance of power without raising a hand. The final consequence was societal as well as institutional. News outlets picked up the story, not just for the arrest, but for the remarkable identity of the man involved and the lessons it illustrated about authority, age, and capability. Public discussion highlighted issues of racial profiling, assumptions about competence based on appearance, and the need for vigilance in law enforcement practices. The narrative transcended the personal incident, becoming a cautionary tale with far-reaching implications. For Rear Admiral Carter, the incident was ultimately a testament to strategy and patience. Every action had been calculated, every response deliberate, every gesture meaningful. He had demonstrated that intelligence, experience, and quiet authority could challenge and correct institutional errors. And while the story concluded formally, its lessons remained ongoing, echoing in discussions, in policies, and in the reflections of all involved. Hutchins, looking back, understood something he had not realized in the moment. He had not arrested just an elderly man at a gas station. He had engaged with someone who had spent a lifetime navigating crises, commanding authority, and anticipating moves far beyond what any ordinary citizen or officer could comprehend. The arrest had been routine only on the surface. Beneath it lay a profound confrontation of judgment, patience, and respect. And when the dust settled, one question remained, an unsettling reminder for anyone observing the story. How many other moments, hidden in plain sight, involve misjudgments, underestimations, or unseen expertise that could overturn the course of events entirely? The arrest of Rear Admiral Carter had ended, but the implications of the encounter, for authority, judgment, and perception, would linger indefinitely. It was a story of tension, patience, and intelligence. A story of authority challenged, assumptions overturned, and subtle power asserted without aggression. And as the station returned to normal, the world moved on, but the lesson endured. Sometimes, the person you underestimate most is the one who can teach the hardest lesson.